Good evening. We're pleased to be streaming live across the United States and probably points abroad with our kickoff for the Vatican II celebration, our evening of history and hope for Vatican II, an evening with Miriam Treese Winter and Paul Lakeland. With me is Jean Marchand, who's pastor of the Spirit of Life community here in Weston, Massachusetts. And say hello, Jean.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Spirit of Life community. We're hosted here in this really lovely space by the Congregational Church of Weston. It's a UCC community that has welcomed us as an alternative Catholic parish with open arms, and we worship here every Sunday, so this is home for me. It's wonderful to welcome all of you here in person, and those of you across the country, and maybe even farther beyond that. That's exciting, really great. So welcome. We're looking forward to a really informative evening and a wonderful opportunity to remember more about Vatican II and learn more and get back in touch with that important event in all of our lives.
Well, and one of the important things about Vatican II is that it's not just a historic fact. It is our hope for the future. It is our going forward. One of the strong initiatives of Call to Action nationally is our Call to Action 2030 group, our young people who are anxious to show that they too are the church and they too understand what the church is and can be. And so we welcome them tonight. One of their leaders, Jen Guterman, is at the camera tonight. So we're pleased to have her with us. And around the country, there are a number of watch parties happening. I know about one in Albany, 2 in Florida, and 2 in Michigan. The West Coast felt a little bit put out that this was so early. It's 5 o'clock in the West Coast, and they're having difficulty getting people together in their homes. So this is a little compromise that we have, and we do hope to have the taping of this up on our website for the future. But tonight we have such wonderful speakers with us that to kick off that Vatican II celebration. You know that it was the 11th of October of 1962 that Pope John the 23rd opened the Vatican Council, and we celebrate that next week, but this is our early celebration. Jean, do you remember those heady days?
I actually do. I was actually a freshman in high school when they were beginning the planning and putting into I guess dreaming for this Vatican Council. And I remember the sister teaching me. I was taught by the Sisters of St. Joseph here in the Boston Archdiocese. Yes, I think they all claim me still. And I remember the sister saying, "This council is going to change your life." Now, I don't remember much from my freshman year. And but I remember that very clearly, and I remember sort of stopping in my tracks and trying to imagine what that could possibly mean. Well, I'm beyond the imagining now. It surely has changed my life, so yeah.
Well, and I recall just after the Vatican Council, I was in college from 64 to 68, and the excitement, the joy that the Catholic Church was on fire, was going to be the group that brought people together in an ecumenical way, going to be a leader for justice, going to take ourselves back to the roots. And so many people have done that, and especially our religious women in their communities, which has been very exciting.
It is exciting, and that brings to mind one of the points we wanted to mention tonight is the upcoming Call to Action Conference, which is November 9th to 11th in Louisville, and we have right here a brochure. If you don't have this in your home, go online and download it. It really looks to be a fabulous conference, and it's the first time Call to Action is gathering in Louisville. Usually it's been in Milwaukee, and I think it's great that they're moving things around a little bit, and perhaps we'll get to meet some new people. But this year, every year Call to Action gives a leadership award. And this year, the 2012 Call to Action Leadership Award will be bestowed upon Sister Pat Farrell, the past president of the LCWR. And that's really exciting that she's graciously accepting this award and our support and encouragement. So please look up this brochure and see if you can make it to Louisville and join us. It's going to be a fabulous gathering. One of the things, I think the speakers are always phenomenal, but it's the networking, the connecting, the meeting other people who are like-minded. It's wonderful to see the 2030s people and how that membership has grown. It's fabulous, really fabulous. And meeting people that you see year after year who are really, like the rest of us, committed to being Catholic, to living our faith in an authentic way and finding ways to share it with the next generation. So we really encourage you to think about coming and joining us for that.
We are being friendly in our warm-up time while we anticipate at 8 o'clock sharp local time, Eastern, that our speakers will make their presentations. But we thought we'd have this opportunity to chat a bit in advance and remind you of the Call to Action Conference, remind you that any contribution that you could make tonight would be well appreciated. For those of you who are watching online, there is a donate button there, and we are grateful for your support. It is what makes it possible for us to be an organization that has such goals of building inclusive communities and activating Catholics for justice. The other thing we wanted to talk about tonight was the fact that there is this community here that you and your husband are the co-pastors of.
Correct.
Why don't you describe how that came to be?
Yes, we are in our 6th year, the Spirit of Life, a Catholic community of justice and joy. We meet here every Sunday evening for liturgy at 5 o'clock during daylight savings time and 4 o'clock when we change the clocks to make it easier for people to get home. So Ron and I, my husband, who's also ordained, co-pastor this faith community, and it truly is an inclusive community. We meet in the round. The chairs you'll see lined up here are in a circle when we gather for liturgy, with the table being in the center of the circle because the altar is the table of the people and not just of the priests. We're all here together, and Ron and I actually sit in the circle and worship along with the community who together we sort of facilitate. We do facilitate, but we have a lot of assistance and inclusion and commitment, amazing commitment on the part of the community. We do a lot of outreach. We support a local inner city house run by the Sisters of St. Joseph, who take care of an immigrant population, helping them find ways to get jobs, and I think that we've been a strong source of support to them. So we have a lot of other outreach activities. I think liturgy, when I think about Vatican II, one of the aspects that comes to my mind is the change in liturgy and how significant that was. And I raised my children during those early years when we truly gathered around the altar in the church, and the children were up front and close and personal. We're a very long way from that now in a traditional parish, unfortunately. So that whole sense of connection and the church truly being the people of God. And we try to live that here at the Spirit of Life. And we invite any of you who are near and far, if you're visiting in this area, to come and worship with us any Sunday evening. We'd love to have you.
Well, I wanted to comment that as I was going around meeting some of you, I was struck by the fact of how far many of you came tonight. That I met people from this area of Massachusetts, of course, but also from New Hampshire, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and it's quite impressive. And we appreciate your coming, and so we're glad to have you. And around the country, we're impressed that you've gathered around your computer screens or your LCD projectors or widescreen TVs to watch this important kickoff for Call to Action's celebration of Vatican II, Church Forward. Vatican II was never meant to be a museum piece, and this is certainly an indication of that as we take this forward.
It's a reminder, while you're checking the website for the Call to Action brochure, you might look at the other activities that are happening around the country that are part of this Vatican II moving forward opportunity. There's a lot happening that I'm just learning about myself, and it's exciting. It's really exciting to breathe life once again into such an important moment in our history that continues to live on. Are we ready? We're ready. All right.
Thank you, Jean. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Bob. It's good to chat.
Good evening. And just to do a sound check, just to make sure, can everyone in the back hear me? Good, good. Well, my name is Jim Fitzgerald, and I'm the Executive Director of Call to Action. And a warm welcome to all of you, both here in this beautiful sanctuary, and to everyone around the country who is joining us live over Call to Action's website. I invite everyone to please visit Call to Action's website and also Call to Action's Facebook page to engage with us on a regular basis. We gather here this evening at the home of Spirit of Life Catholic Community, located just here outside of Boston, Massachusetts. And I'd like to thank the Spirit of Life Catholic Community, as well as the Congregational Church of Weston, for their wonderful hospitality and the use of their sanctuary. Next Thursday marks the 50th anniversary of the opening of the Second Vatican Council and the beginning of the Year of Faith. Tonight's event is the first of a number of events that are happening around the country these next several weeks as part of Call to Action's Vatican II Church Forward series. We Catholics who want a more just and inclusive church may have the tendency to look back at Vatican II with a sense of grief, thinking of all that could have been or should have been. But in many ways, Vatican II continues to unfold right before our eyes. And there is much of Vatican II that keeps us looking forward. So tonight we reflect on Vatican II, an evening of history and of hope. There can be no better pair to bring us history and hope than Paul Lakeland and Miriam Therese Winter. Our two speakers will offer their presentations, and that will be followed by a question and answer format conversation. I will offer a brief introduction of both our speakers now so that their presentations can flow seamlessly from one to the other. Our first speaker. Paul Lakeland is Aloysius Kelly Chair in Catholic Studies at Fairfield University in Connecticut and author of numerous books, including The Liberation of the Laity in Search of an Accountable Church, which won first place for theology in the Catholic Press Association's 2005 awards, and Catholicism at the Crossroads, How the Laity Can Save the Church. Not only is Dr. Lakeland a first-rate scholar, but he is an outstanding teacher. A quote from one of his students from a class Dr. Lakeland offered echoes the sentiments of countless of others who have sat in Paul's classroom. The student writes, "He is so knowledgeable about the laity's role in the Catholic Church. I wasn't too interested at first, but I wound up learning a lot about Catholicism. Definitely take him." Paul, we are so glad that you are here. Sister Miriam Therese Winter, MT, a medical mission sister and professor of liturgy, worship, spirituality, and feminist studies, and director of the Women's Leadership Institute at Hartford Seminary in Connecticut. Her contributions to the learning of so many have come in various forms. In written word, such as the Gospel according to Mary, a New Testament for women, and Paradoxology, Spirituality in a Quantum Universe, are just two examples of her many works. And in song, MT has inspired countless of listeners with soaring musical compositions such as Joy is Like the Rain, Remember Me, and her most recent Loving You. Like Paul, MT is not only a prolific writer and scholar, but is also a beloved teacher by her students at Hartford Seminary. When one meets MT, one realizes that they are blessed to celebrate what she calls the liturgy of life. MT, we are thrilled you are with us tonight. My sisters and brothers, let us now then begin an evening of history and hope. Please join me in welcoming our two outstanding presenters, Miriam Therese Winter, and first now, Mr. Paul Lakeland.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks to all of you that I can see and all of those I can't see but can see me who are somewhere else. This is a very busy time for ecclesiologists. This month there's not that many of us, and we're all running around going to different places, and we've had lots of requests to do lots of different things. And I have thought long and hard about some of them, but when I was asked to do this, I didn't pause for a moment. It's a great pleasure to be here with Call to Action, and something that I haven't actually done as frequently as I wished I had. So my task is to, in 20 minutes or so, review the council. So I've called it, for my own purposes, recalling the council, a lightning review. So here we go. So half a century after the council opened, there's a number of ways that we can remember it. We too often find ourselves these days in a form of what I would call qualified lament. Yes, it was a wonderful thing, but how disappointing that it has not been fully implemented. Or, indeed, that there are people in the church who wish it had never happened. But we're not going to do that today. Today we're going to celebrate. In this inevitably lightning sketch, I want to remind us all of some of the remarkable achievements of the Council, both its unqualified successes and perhaps a couple of areas where the Council moved forward on important issues but didn't really go far enough. There were certainly some places where the Council either lost its nerve a little bit or, perhaps more likely, compromised in order to obtain the kind of overwhelming votes that all the documents received. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but of the 4 sessions of the Council from 62 to 65, there were between 2,000 and 2,500 bishops voting at any time. And I think the largest number of no votes was cast for one of the 16 documents was about 130. So typically it would be 2,474 yes, 23 no. That's the kind of, and that requires a measure of compromise. So what are we celebrating after 50 years? The list of the Council's achievements is a long one. In its authoritative teaching, Vatican II just revolutionized many aspects of church life and changed the church in ways that can never really be reversed. Never be reversed. Here's just a short list first, just a short list of what I think are the major achievements of Vatican II. And if I leave off your favorite, remember it's a lightning sketch. It restored sacred scripture to the role of the primary source of revelation, with tradition as its important complement, as opposed to talking about two sources of revelation as if tradition were on a par with the Word of God in Scripture. Second, it changed the way the church saw its relationship to other Christian churches and to the great religions of the world, especially to Judaism. It is a huge step from doing what we did back in the early 60s and before, praying for the faithless Jews, shame on us, to praying for the Jews as, quote, the first to be called the people of God. 3, it frankly even brutally repudiated centuries of religious intolerance in the Declaration on Religious Liberty, under the influence of Father John Courtney Murray, S.J., who also was the first Jesuit to get his picture on the front page of Time magazine, but 5 years before that council document came out. It introduced, number 4, it introduced the idea that the church is more accurately thought of as a pilgrim people moving through history instead of a perfect society here on earth, or even simply a mystical body. 5, it insisted on the universal call to holiness, which meant that the laity had to abandon their lack of self-confidence and stop thinking of themselves as holding a place on the bottom rung of the spiritual life. 6, it returned to the early church's understanding of the Mass as the act of the whole community of faith, and restored the sense that it was a communal meal and not only a sacrifice. 7, it restored the centrality of the sacrament of baptism in Christian life. Baptism was what made a Christian an apostle, and baptism was at least as much about mission as it was about welcoming the new Christian to the community. The church is not a club of the privileged, but a community charged to spread the gospel. And finally, number 8, it took another look at the relationship between the church and the world, so that the church would henceforth be prophetic rather than defensive, open to learning rather than sequestered behind the walls of the fortress, and ready to play its part in the ongoing quest for a better world. So that's a list of 8, and we could certainly add a lot more. Now, we could spend the few minutes that we have together exploring any one of these issues in detail. But what I'm going to do is just pick out 4 of them for a particular reason you'll see in a minute, and then dwell on one of them a little bit longer. So, I want to pick out these 4 because they illustrate so clearly what I think is the principal reason we should be celebrating the achievements of Vatican II. In my mind, Vatican II can best be understood as an occasion of rebalancing things that over history had become distorted or plain dysfunctional. In other words, it wasn't just about novelty, and it certainly wasn't just about repeating the past. Here's the place where the standoff between more liberal and more conservative interpretations of the Council just might meet. The Council wanted both, and you've heard these words many times, wanted both aggiornamento, bringing up to date, and ressourcement, going back to the sources. Speaking to the world of today is not a liberal issue, and returning to the sources is not for conservatives alone. So let's use the language of rebalancing, of restoring the balance that the vicissitudes of history had occasioned, or had destroyed, rather. So, 4 of the 8 I just mentioned in slightly more detail. First, the Council ushered in a return to an understanding of the liturgy as the act of the whole community of faith, and doing this, it rebalanced the relationship between the Mass as a sacrifice and the Mass as a commemoration of the Last Supper. Liturgical practice in the entire second millennium of the Church had all but obliterated any feeling for the Mass as a shared meal. And the reaction of the Protestant Reformation only made the Catholic Church more determined to emphasize one meaning of the Eucharist and ignore the other. A lot of that went on in the years after the Reformation. A lot of what we came to stress in the Catholic Church, we stressed because the other people were stressing the opposite. It was very silly but understandable. Second of these four, Vatican II restored the centrality of the sacrament of baptism and rebalanced its relationship to the Eucharist. It was this which had the effect of reminding the Church that the baptismal priesthood of the whole people was overdue for new attention. Indeed, the assertion that the baptismal and the ordained priesthood were different, and this is a quote from Lumen Gentium, the Constitution on the Church, were different in essence and not only in degree, the two priesthoods, was actually quite important. And it wasn't the put down that some have imagined it might have been, including me for quite a while. Because what it showed when they said this, the two priesthoods, the baptismal priesthood, the ordained priesthood, when they said that they are different in essence and not only in degree, what they're saying is that baptismal priesthood is not a lesser priesthood, but a different priesthood from that of the ordained. Third, by the way, the reason that we stopped talking about the baptismal priesthood was because Martin Luther thought that was the only priesthood. So if that was going to be his view, we were going to take the opposite view. And there you are. Third, by placing the model of people of God at the center of its reflection on the Church, the Council rebalanced community and hierarchy. Hierarchy, indeed, has its meaning only within the context of the whole people of God. And then, fourthly, as a result of theological reflection upon creation, incarnation, and the mystery of grace, the Council rebalanced the relationship between the Church and the world, so that the Church would henceforth be prophetic rather than defensive, open to learning rather than sequestered behind the walls of the fortress, and ready to play its part in the ongoing human quest for a better world. Behind all four of these achievements lies the vision of John the 23rd, who was a man who wanted to embrace rather than repudiate, to encourage rather than scold, and to be compassionate rather than judgmental. Let's stay for a moment longer with one of these four acts of rebalancing, that of the renewed attention to baptism, because it results in the recognition that the work of all Christians, and especially the laity, is a work of mission. Over time, the Church came to think of the ordained and the members of religious orders as those who did the work of the Church, and the laity as those who received from them. As Pius X famously said, and I quote, "The one duty of the multitude is to allow themselves to be led, and like a docile flock, to follow their pastors." Rebalancing the relationship of ordained and laity involves obliterating such remarks from Christian consciousness, even if they were the utterances of a canonized saint. Today, thanks to the Council, we see the whole priestly people called into apostolic activity. And frankly, we see the laity doing the bulk of the work in the world, as the ordained primarily serve the community of faith's internal needs. To some degree, this truth has been obscured by the Catholic practice of infant baptism and the slow but steady decline in the meaning of confirmation. Baptism has become simply a rite of initiation, and confirmation often seems not to be much more than a signal that CCD is no longer a requirement, and indeed that Sunday Mass has become a personal lifestyle choice. Baptism and confirmation, however, are the two parts of initiation into a missioned community. In baptism, the Christian is not so much rewarded with new advantages as she or he is charged with new responsibilities. This becomes very clear if we look at the parallels between the story of the baptism of Jesus and the sacramental ritual for baptism today. They both include, so if you look at Matthew's story of the baptism of Jesus, what will you find? You'll find the ritual as the Baptist baptizes him, the coming down of the Spirit, naming as God's own, and the repudiation of Satan. And you find those elements in the regular rich sacrament of baptism in the church. In the gospel, Jesus, immediately after repudiating Satan, Jesus turns to mission and ministry. But our baptismal ritual becomes amnesiac at this point. Mission is at least as much what baptism and confirmation are about as sacrament of initiation. Now let's take a brief look beyond the conciliar documents to the importance of the council as an event. And here I have to give thanks to two great scholars who have talked about this at length, John O'Malley and Joe Komonchak, two of the great older generation, I mean even older than my generation of scholars of the church. At this anniversary moment in the life of the church, people are inclined to ask if the council still matters, especially perhaps those who are young and for whom it is lost in the mists of antiquity, along with the Vietnam War and the Cuban Missile Crisis. There is no question, of course, that the Vatican II changed the church forever. The vast majority of Catholics who even know that Vatican II happened, certainly no more than 25%, are united in a belief that it still matters. Conservatives fight daily to show that its importance lies in the continuity it expressed with the past, and its novelties, they will say, were few, just dewy-eyed optimism, and frequently overstated by post-conciliar enthusiasm. Liberals believe that continuity with the past is continuity in change, and they rejoice in the changes the documents brought and the ecclesial climate that ensued, while being sobered perhaps by the realization that most, if not all, of our bishops are not always on board. This conversation is a never-ending argument. Right and left may talk intensely about whether the council meant this or that about liturgical change, or what the implications of its discussion of the secularity of the laity might be, or whether episcopal collegiality is more effective or affective. They will surely never agree on what the council meant in the discussion of the infallibility of the sensus fidelium. But the very fact that the argument is taking place at all is the strongest testimony to the way in which the Second Vatican Council changed the Roman Catholic Church forever. Rarely in the council documents is the call to simple obedience made. Dogmatic pronouncements and anathemas call for obedience, and every conciliar document before Vatican II used the language of dogmatic pronouncements and anathemas, judgments upon those who thought wrongly. Vatican II was the first council to adopt a different style, one which marked its pastoral rather than dogmatic character. The persuasive rhetoric they employed takes its listeners more seriously and recognizes that assent cannot simply be commanded. Obedience is often right for children, though, because I said so, rarely works, a lesson that parents might pass along to bishops. Whether the council fathers meant to or not, their rhetorical style affirmed the adulthood of the community of faith, linked the church for once to the best of democratic life, and pretty much assured that church teaching must ever after persuade and cannot simply command assent. Their conscious choice of the way in which they would teach was in the end at least as important as what they taught. Vatican II, in its manner of proceeding, spoke to what we might call a people of God come of age. Now, the first response of a people of God come of age is to take ownership. There is no question that apostolic leadership belongs with the bishops, whose authority is in a real sense derived from the apostles. Lumen Gentium is clear that, and I quote, the laity should promptly accept in Christian obedience what their pastors decide, since their pastors represent Christ. But it's very important to note that this call to obedience is placed in the context of a church in which the pastors, and I quote again, should recognize and promote the dignity and responsibility of the laity in the church. They should willingly use their prudent advice and must respect and recognize the liberty which belongs to all in the terrestrial city. They go on and say that among the many benefits for the church of this familiar relationship between the laity and the pastors are, and I'm still quoting, the sense of their own responsibility is strengthened in the laity. Their zeal is encouraged, and they are more ready to unite their energies to the work of their pastors. Moreover, the clergy, helped by the experience of the laity, are in a position to judge more clearly and more appropriately in spiritual as in temporal matters. Here is my question. If this extraordinarily healthy vision of how the whole people take ownership of our church is indeed to a high degree in place in at least some of our better run parishes, why is this relationship so sadly lacking in the wider church? There are few, if any, vehicles by means of which the teaching church can take advantage of the experience and wisdom of the laity. And there is very little evidence that prudent advice could be taken or can even be offered. Let me draw this to a close with a thought about the counsel and call to action. Much of what I've had to say is about the restoration of the sense of apostolicity among all the laity. When you are baptized, you are an apostle, you are sent, you are on a mission. Call to action leads the way in this movement. But I think it also has a more particular role. In the document Lumen Gentium, immediately before that passage that people like us all love, where we are told that the laity have the right to manifest their opinion on those things which pertain to the good of the church. Remember that one? We've used that a lot. But right before that, we are also informed, quote, the laity have the right to receive in abundance the help of the spiritual goods of the church, especially that of the Word of God and the sacraments from our pastors. Perhaps we don't always see the relevance of linking these two statements for the work of reform movements in the church. When we are at our most outspoken about internal church matters, and not so taken up with apostolic activity in the world, we are doing nothing more radical than demanding a nurturing church. Vatican II calls on the laity to make clear to our bishops and pastors that their primary responsibility is to be spiritual leaders to the community of faith, as ours is to proclaim the good news in the world. And if we need to remind them that we need spiritual nurturing far more than we need ethical micromanaging or intrusion into national politics, then Vatican II wants us to do that. If we are asking for reform of ordained ministry, the inclusion of women and married men, if we are calling for a greater role for laypersons in the selection of pastors and bishops, if we would like to see the Roman Curia return to being an administrative convenience and not an arm of creeping infallibility before which even bishops cringe, in fact, we are simply asking for a church in which leadership is about spiritual nourishment. Do this well, we are imploring them. Call us all to holiness, and we will do the work of Christ in the world. This message of Vatican II is really something we should continue to celebrate. Thank you.
let you move.
Thank you. Is this on? Thank you. I am delighted to be here to share in this launching of the 50th anniversary celebration of Vatican II by call to action. I am a product of Vatican II. And people can say, well, that's all that's wrong with it, if that's what turned out. And I'd like to think of it another way. And I'm also delighted to bring here a message of hope. There's not a whole lot of that going around these days, but I have an endless supply of hope. I was there before Vatican II. I know what it was like then. I lived through the anguish of launching this enormous initiative within the church that I have loved and continue to love. And I'm still here, and I'm not quitting yet. Thank you. Thank you. The way I want to approach this is to remind us as we celebrate Vatican II during this coming year to be careful not to approach it like a eulogy or an obituary. It isn't over. We need to look back, as was masterfully done by Paul, look back to see what was launched 50 years ago, what was put into motion, what is continuing on, and what is yet to be fulfilled or completed, or what new initiatives need to be launched as a result of the energy and the impetus of that momentous moment. Okay. What I'd like to say is, in my opinion, the lasting legacy, the primary lasting legacy of the Second Vatican Council was the gift of the Holy Spirit in our lives. The Spirit of God, the Spirit of the living God, the living Spirit of the living God living among us and, whoa, within us. So much has happened because we have embraced the Spirit and we have opened ourselves to trust the Spirit, often when there are counter signals or signs or statements or demands that ask us to do or be or act otherwise. And then trusting the living Spirit of the living God, we continue to go forward. And as we look back, we see the results of that incredible faith in the Spirit of God. And that was the gift Pope John Paul gave us. Remember the image? It's like a metaphor. Threw open the windows or knocked down the walls or the fences, whatever you want to say, of the church. And the Spirit, let the Spirit in, aggiornamento, get up to date. Let the Spirit blow freely through. And let me tell you, once you do that, there ain't no controlling or packaging or stopping the Spirit. It is out of our control. So much so that it even restructured, in some sense, the Spirit's place in that divine hierarchy as number 3 in a male, Father, Son, and this bird, which actually flew away in the burst of the wind of the Spirit, the power of the Spirit. And what happened for us at that moment in time, which we can't really realize or recognize until we look back, just like in the Gospels as we read or in the stories of the early church, they didn't realize what was happening among them until they looked back. We had a second Pentecost, and that the doors were blown open. There was a loud noise. There was thunder. There was shaking everything up. We turned the altars around. We kind of threw out a language that had been with us for decades, centuries, Latin. We turned to the vernacular. We looked to the people, and all of a sudden reoriented everything, not from top down, but from bottom up, and not from outside in, but from inside out. It's remarkable. And that was not for that moment only. It was a reorientation of everything within what we call the church. So that beautiful phrase, we are the church, which is the motto of call to action, is call to action in the times in which we live, to remember we are church. And it is up to us, in and through the power of the Spirit in and among us together, to help lead the next generation on into the future, reading the signs of the times now, as the council and the people of God back then in the 60s read the signs of the times then. And while there are perennial overarching themes that are similar, like wars and rumors of war and chaos and people who are in and people who are out in need and all kinds of stuff, nevertheless, the signs of our times are distinctively unique. And we don't have a roadmap to guide us down a path that we have yet to walk upon. We need to make the maps. But we live in an age when we have GPS. And now that I think about it, the grand power of the Spirit. Just made that one up. Trust the Spirit when you stand up, because the Spirit will give us what to say. Okay, let me just rush quickly now, because I spent a lot of time setting this up, and I need to stay within my frame. So give me a beep when I'm about 2 minutes, okay? Cough or whatever. The church then, as I said, there were a series of movements, because the Spirit doesn't just pop in and out. There are movements like the wind. And one of the big movements, that liturgical movement that looked like it wasn't going to go anywhere, was the incredible surprise of the very first document that allowed all this to start. Okay, so you had then the change of the liturgy, and you had the wonderful people celebrating, and we had writing songs. I was able to sing songs that kind of helped us to really celebrate as a people and a community. So that was gift one of the Spirit that is still living on. So we are still people of God in parish or community settings, church settings, and we are continuing to live out that gift, in our own times. The second gift is, and was already mentioned, that we grew to realize that while we are church, we're not the only church. It's not just us that are church. We are a unique and distinctive tradition of church, a path. But there were many other churches, so ecumenically, we began to reach out and become very connected with other traditions. I myself traveled to just, you name the denomination, including Old Order Mennonites and Amish peoples and everywhere, because they were singing the songs that I had started to write, because we couldn't find much else to sing that wasn't in Latin, and that was part of our tradition. And so we became communities together, and I began saying, wow, they're very different, but they love the same God, and they're following Jesus, and they do good works, and they call themselves church. Who am I to say they are not? And so many of us out there began to create this ecumenical reality, so that more and more the sense of church became spilling over to one another's, embracing one another's traditions. Like here we are tonight. Isn't this beautiful? Celebrating the Catholic community within this wonderful congregational UCC tradition church. Another big movement, besides then the ecumenical movement, was this movement to get educated, to find out some of the stuff that we just took for granted. Like, we weren't even reading the Bible. I mean, we knew nothing about the Bible, but we opened the book, and then we realized we better have some Bible studies. So there were Bible studies and biblical, people were getting biblical degrees, and we learned about the historical critical methods and how to do, and we had to learn from the Protestants, because the Catholics didn't do it. But they came in and did beautiful work afterwards. So we turned to our neighbors, and we learned that. And you know what happened? Everybody started reading the Bible, including people in favelas and in poverty-stricken areas in different parts of the world, based communities, and they were choosing different texts. They're saying God is with the poor, not with the rich, and they began to shake things up so that liberation, the theologians came in and began to create this liberation theology that, wait a minute, we're favoring the wrong side, not just all this pomp and circumstance and wealth and grandeur is not so much the sign of the divine among us, but reaching out to the poor and the brokenhearted and finding what is a message of hope and gospel of good news for them. So that was another movement, and then along with that is a search for the historical Jesus, because we had no trouble with language and traditions that saw Jesus the Christ as God, as divine, but we had very little to help us understand that Jesus was actually human as well. And so the Jesus seminars and a lot of work has been done, and they even discovered another gospel in 1838, and nobody around here has read it yet. Which says something about us, doesn't it? The Q gospel texts and all, possibly a very early source of the sayings of Jesus, which remarkably had a strong orientation toward nature and the poor and simple things, okay? So there was that movement, and then let me throw into the pot here the big movement of feminism. The feminist women, whoa, did that shake up the church when women got into the pulpits and into the classrooms with their degrees, read the Bible, and said, wait a minute, approach this text with a hermeneutic of suspicion. There's something wrong with this story. And we've lived long enough, I see, from the women among us to know if there's something wrong with this picture, there is something wrong with the picture. It's not just women's problem. We're bringing an insight to everything, every field of study, every educational opportunity, all parts where the church is, which is where life is, bringing that dimension. So the whole liberation of women, women's liberation, feminist movement is huge. And then let me throw in a particular category, the nuns. There's a tendency to throw the nuns under the bus, but we're getting on it and we're driving off into the future. Let me tell you this. This is such a sign of hope and good news. Mothers, grandmothers, you'll understand this. Would you yell at the kids at the second floor, stop making all that noise, if they're sleeping? The sign of our success in shaking things up, in making the comfortable uncomfortable, and trying to call them to accountability for justice and for the poor and for the real issues that are out here, invisible and clearly signs of our times, to be speaking to the true, real needs of what's going on here and now. Well, somebody's got to do it, and we have nothing to lose. I'm how many years in the community? 60, maybe. I lose count. Close to that, 50, 58. And what am I going to lose? They can't take anything away from me because they haven't actually given me anything. Except a canonical status that has made me miserable. And forces me to decide every time, whoa, should I, do this or speak out like this that's streaming live around the United States? In the sense of we just have to stand up and be counted. So that's another movement, okay? I got 2 more to throw in because 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit, I like it to come out even, okay? So I'm up to the 6th one, the whole movement of ecology. I mean, I want to tell you, everything I've mentioned before Vatican II was like nothing there, really, maybe little whispers of things. The whole ecological movement, Gaia, planet Earth, recognizing our relationship with all living things, the beautiful work that has been done, liturgies and prayers, and a recovery of an understanding of our place within the hierarchy of being, within the community of life. And then, coming off of that, the beautiful universe story, the sense cosmology, ecology, cosmology, from the very, very macro, to the distant, beyond anything we would ever know, to the micro, that within our own selves, the microcosms and within us, that all of us, the whole sense of the new science, bringing the new science to bear on how we talk about things of God, how we relate to life, to afterlife, when we look up and see the stars and realize we're a part of that and that is a part of us. All these movements are source of excitement and hope because we are so much larger than we were before. We are, and like everyone fits within our circle now, because it's not just enough for Catholics or Christians, or maybe we'll let in a few others, you know. I'm at a seminary where there's Muslims and every stripe you can imagine. They're my students, they're my colleagues, they are my friends. We pray together. We are in classrooms together, and somehow we stand as a witness to the world that we are all God's people. We are all God's people, and that somehow we have to learn to live as if we really believed this, and then act like it. So the streams, the movement started with the launching of freeing up the spirit to begin to be active among this enormous population called Roman Catholicism, that we need to continue on these movements. We have so much to do and so much more that's possible because we are not alone. We need to be in solidarity with all other peoples because the issues underlying the needs are the same. They are human issues. They are issues of justice. They are universal. And along with that, all of the planet, all life forms, we need to have this consciousness. We want a world that we want to hand on to the future that will still not only be there, but will be there with integrity, will have beauty, will have meaning. Now you can say, oh, Pollyanna MT, you know? Well, you know what? I prefer that than to say gloom and doom. Because, you know, nothing is ever perfect. People, and I'm a perfectionist, so someone just said to me again, MT, done is better than perfect. I was trying to finish something. She said, the deadline, done is better than perfect, meaning do something. Anything, my life motto is, anything worth doing is worth doing badly. Because it's never good enough. It's never going to be enough. Do something. Because you know what? You're going to blow somebody else away and they'll say, whoa, you did that. And you say, whoa, yeah, I could do better than that. We'll just do, you know. The point is we all just sit, but we become very passive. We need to kind of re-energize ourselves like it was back in the 60s. And there's a lot of life in the old girls yet, and in the old guys yet, okay? There's a lot of life. We can do this. And what we need to do is witness to the generations that follow. That there are things that not only still need doing, but we will be in partnership with you along these same streams, because it is the same. It's the same issues going deeper and deeper and wider and getting more and more meaningful. We have, and remember the words going back to love one another. As Jesus told us in all these situations, we have to just be persons of love. He was a person filled with the Spirit of God, filled with the Holy Spirit. We need to be filled with the Spirit of God, open to the Spirit, and then that way we can do and be anything, because it is the power of God's living Spirit that lives in and through us. Thank you.
Paul and MT. At a time when the official or institutional church seems to be retracting a lot of Vatican II, it seems that our mission, we are the church, are finding our voice, that we are the ones that are called upon to sort of keep the church faithful or keep the church alive and listen to the Spirit. And our mission as an adult church is finding our own voice. But for instance, in our community here, the Spirit of Life community, I find a real source of hope for what the church can be. And I'd just like you to comment on that thought of we are the church, not waiting for the official church to do it, but all of us finding our voice and claiming our place in the church.
Anyone want to respond first?
Well, I mean, my response would be, of course we are. And I think that, you know, in some ways, although the forces in the church that sometimes seem to us to be trying to backtrack, often do so by insisting on the letter of the documents. Actually, there's a great deal in the letter of those documents that justifies the kind of move precisely the kind of thing you're talking about. For example, it's very clear in the document on the church that in the chapter on the laity, which is a very rich chapter, that we are called to be prophetic. And to be prophetic means a couple of things. It means challenging where it is necessary to challenge, and it also means teaching. We have a teaching role. So, yes, I agree with you that this is what we need to do. And I think, you know, part of the burden of what I tried to say a little earlier was that the council both its event status and its documentary tradition, is our best friend in challenging those who want to pull back.
I have no memory of any time when the institutional church was not retracting. So I wouldn't wait. In fact, the movements I pointed out, when they finally came to fruition in terms of some success, there was a long prehistory there, underground, you could use the word underground, back rooms, churches within other traditions meeting. This is the way it always happens. And then all of a sudden, something that's banned or forbidden eventually becomes tolerated, then eventually becomes accepted. And then also the tragedy is often it becomes then mandated as the new thing you must do. We probably won't get there with a lot of the things we want to see happen. But truly, if you really feel moved by the Spirit that something is important and you test it with some people and it seems to have integrity, do it. You'll be sowing seeds for that which will come after.
Thank you. Before we go taking questions in the sanctuary here, this question comes from Steve in Albany, New York. Albany, New York is having a watch party tonight, so we bid hello to everyone here from Boston, everyone in Albany. We are now connected. Steve in Albany asks, many members in Albany are facing the loss of Vatican II bishops due to retirement and so forth. How can we best prepare for the appointment of new bishops who may be less concerned with the role of the faithful and less supportive of the role of women at all levels of the church?
It's your turn to start.
It's my turn to withdraw. You're the expert.
It's a particularly difficult problem, not just in Albany or not just in New York State. Because there's something almost deliberate about the selection of a particular kind of person to be our bishops. It's not, I mean, I'm sure that most times in the church's history there have been some bishops who've been difficult to get along with and some who haven't, and some who've been more what we might call progressive and some who haven't. But we seem today not only to be having, to be drawing our bishops from a very narrow segment of people, but also we seem to be moving bishops into key positions who are, it's almost flagrant. The best example I can think of is the new Archbishop of San Francisco, who seems to have been selected because of his lack of sensitivity to gay and lesbian issues. And you put him into the capital city of gay and lesbian America. I mean, that's the kind of thing we're dealing with. All I can say as a sign of hope, I guess we should try to be hopeful, is that it may very well be that it is our role, this is part of our prophetic role, part of our teaching role, that we have to train these guys. And if we have to train them with tough love, then we'll have to train them with tough love. That we should not ever knuckle under to what seems to be not of the gospel, not of the Spirit. But it's not the same thing as saying that we should expect every bishop to be of a particular temperament, or for that matter, a particular ideological leaning. But they're supposed to be our pastors. It goes back to the one point I made in my 20 minutes that I would consider to be the most important, which is that we are obligated to demand a nurturing church. And if we're not getting nourished, we have to do something about that.
Thank you. That's very well said. Thank you. I just want to add this, that more and more, the climate in which we live politically and ecclesiologically is getting ugly. Instead of finding ways to work together, to be in solidarity with, to support and to say, I don't agree with this, but I respect you, or what we have to be so careful that we don't become that which we are wounded by, because it is so hard to remain loving and hope-filled and not angry or ugly in face of some of the things that have been happening. Go back to the stories of Jesus. That's the only thing I can encourage us to do. Those were not easy times that he was living in. There was a strong similarity to times such as these. His own religious tradition was very stringent and favoring the kinds of people that he did not. And politically, there was occupation, there was such need and everything. But Jesus did not turn into an ugly, rancorous revolutionary, but kept preaching, peace be unto you, peace be unto this house. And if you don't receive it, I'm moving on to the next one, and love one another. We really need to work hard at that, because it is not easy in the times in which we live.
Question over here. If you could just speak into the mic and share us what your name.
Kathy Panozzi. The comment is really, a lot of it comes from the fact that the more I come to understand the origins not only of the church, but who Jesus was, that the image that always comes to me is what many people consider the beginning of the priesthood, the Last Supper. And yet to me, it's Jesus on his knees. And Jesus was never a priest. I don't think he ordained anybody, and I don't think he was ordained. And I think very powerfully that this sense of what you spoke about the baptism of the faithful, that whatever priesthood means in that sense, prophet, mission, service, not the one who is the presider, but always the servant. And I just think if we could speak to that and see that more and more, that would counter so much of what it is that is oppressing people.
Comment from Paul or MT on that one?
Yeah, I would just very quickly say, I think you're right that Jesus clearly possessed the priesthood of all the baptized. He was the first in line, I suppose. But the ordained priesthood is something that comes into existence over a period of 2 centuries, really, and happens in some very haphazard ways. I mean, we look back now and we try to pretend that it was all so nice and smooth, and it wasn't. Yes, Jesus was a layman. I suspect Jesus would be quite surprised by the structure of ministry that grew up in the centuries after his death. It doesn't. It's hard to imagine that he would be comfortable with that. That doesn't mean that it was a bad thing. You know, history. I mean, there had to be a way for the church to cohere and exist in history, and structures of ministry, at least, were clearly going to happen. But over time, you know, the bureaucrats get their hands on those things, and the bureaucrats are they're not comfortable with the Spirit, or perhaps they think, perhaps they're actually a bit put out because the Spirit doesn't follow their rules, you know?
And let's not forget that Jesus was a Jew. He lived a Jew. He died a Jew. And I guess he rose as a Christian. Something happened behind the scene.
I don't know about that. No, I think
literally, he died. He was Jewish. And a tradition, a new initiative was constructed and built in memory of him, upon his memory, living what they felt was in his spirit. But we have to be careful not to make him the first priest at the Last Supper and the first Mass, because we've reconstructed that to fit our own image of our tradition.
I'm Pat, and I just want to give a simple bow to MT because she set me on part of my path about 10 years ago with the Women's Leadership Institute. And there's nothing like finding your voice, and I think that that is one of the most important things any of us can do. I work with Pax Christi, a sister organization to Call to Action, and for years and years been working within the church trying to bring the truth of Jesus' nonviolence to the church, meeting resistance after resistance after resistance. I just wonder, to what degree do you feel that our inability to embrace this particular aspect has affected everything? The church has no voice, no real strong present-day voice in a loud way about war, about drones, about torture. Perhaps there are documents that have been written, but it doesn't filter through. And we who work in the peace and justice movement are constantly battling resistance from this section of the church. So I'm not sure. If this is a question, it's just a comment. And if you have any comments, I'd appreciate it.
it's pretty clear that the gospel calls to nonviolence. The trouble goes back a very long way, though. It goes back to the 4th century when the church chose to compromise with the power of the state. And ever since, it's been struggling, and it's like kicking in a net. It knows what it ought to do, and it can't do it, either because it's sold out to the advantages of the protection of the state, or it's sold out to an understanding of power that belongs with the state. And so the tragedy, I think, is exactly the one that you expressed, that we are, as institutions, it's not just the Catholic Church, but we are, as institutions, compromised by that relationship to secular power, and the gospel doesn't really license that. So it's like a little, it's an internal problem, and it's very hard to imagine that institutions will ever entirely free themselves from that, but individuals within the church certainly can.
Beautiful. Thank you.
We have a question from Linda from Los Angeles. She writes, I am a product of the 60s and 70s, and my children are products of the 80s and 90s, which one of my professors said produced the most spiritual people. So why, here's the question is, so why are we moving backward under the current hierarchical leadership of the church? Is a revolution or evolution in the making?
It's hard to answer that question as articulated, because once you put it under the hierarchical church, then you're defining everything as if it were under that umbrella. There are such widespread movements, collections of communities of faith-filled, faithful individuals of all ages. It's just that we have got to grow into an understanding of the distinction between faith and belief. The younger people are no longer believe the things we grew up believing automatically, which constituted, therefore, our faith. They say, I don't believe that, and therefore I get all the time women coming to me, my daughter has lost her faith. And I said, well, tell me about her. She doesn't believe this, but she's a good person, and she prays, and she loves God, and she's helping her neighbor, and so, and it's, I think, that kind of incredible dichotomy between, there's only a certain way you can be to be considered faithful, a faithful Catholic. And I say we need to change it to the word to faith-filled, that we're not. There was a time, it was in the first century, toward the end of the first century, that the shift happened. The move from faith, being filled with faith, your faith will cure you, your faith will heal you. Jesus said, your faith will make you whole. The faith in God, the tradition that emerged in memory of Jesus began to shift that to keeping the faith, which began to be defined creedally, in dogmas and doctrines, and so only if you believed, I believe this, are you a faithful follower. And that has shifted now because we were indoctrinated in that way. But Vatican II opened up a whole new pathway. So even we have changed, but the new people, your children, your grandchildren, the children to come will be clueless about any of that. And so we have got to find a way so that not only will our children have faith, but will our church have children, will our faith have children, because we've got to work on getting to where the young people are rather than bringing them to where we have been.
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. I would add a couple, just one very quickly. I think one of the problems for the institutional church is that it's kind of running scared. I think that our bishops, they really don't know what to do, and so there's a tendency just to sort of repeat everything or speak more loudly or something like that. But the project is exactly what MT said. The project for the institutional church is to recalibrate its sense of mission so that it sees itself in the service of exactly those people who probably aren't in the church all the time. It sees itself in the service of the good people I teach every day, who are shining examples of all sorts of things that I'm not good at, but who are not particularly interested in what's going on inside the church building. The Spirit is at work in this. Somewhere or other. This is not a movement against, if these are good people, this is not something that is against the Spirit of God. And our church has to find a way to be more flexible in its understanding of what it means to serve the people of God.
Excellent.
Sometimes I think it's important to go back to what you said about the spiritual responsibility that laity have to demand more opportunities to grow in the Spirit in themselves. And oftentimes at meetings like this, we Catholics sometimes spend so much time talking about the ordained or the hierarchy or whatever.
Yes.
What you both have said and demonstrated in terms of what's the hope? The hope is the Spirit, the hope is spirituality. And we don't really need the ordained or those in power in Rome to tell us anything about this. I think that movements like Richard Rohr has done with the emerging church idea, I think is really good. I mean, in terms of what are we waiting for? Why do we keep talking about those bishops or the Pope or the scandal of the butler in Rome? Who cares? I mean, really, we have to kind of do what you have both talked about. Spirituality, and you don't need an imprimatur any place, I don't think. But anyway.
Not an answer, but just a comment. I think we need to return to try to be followers of Jesus. What we've become are the followers of 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 the followers, all the way back to the first ones who tried to remember what he actually tried to tell them long after, he was gone. And if we go back, there's still enough, while the evidence is not always clear, there's still enough hints in the documents we have, the Gospels, that he really hung out with all the wrong people, that the institution really chastised him for, and even his own family was horrified from time to time, that in fact he followed what instinctively he believed was what Spirit was telling him, that the reign of God, the presence of God, the love of God is already here among us, and preach a gospel of peace. Peace be with you. Peace be unto your household. If we could get back to that simple message and just leave all the rest of figuring everything else out to the Spirit of God and not get all caught up in the dynamics of institutionalization, I think we could help to change the world to be a better place.
So I missed a few hands over here.
Yeah, my name is Bob, and I'm an ordained priest, member of the Association of U.S. Catholic Priests. One of the things that we have been looking at is the process of having a better sense of Vatican II. And the question I think that Stephen asked from Albany had to do with what are we going to do with bishops who are not in tune with what we call the focus and the direction of Vatican II. And one of the things you said, Paul, is to be attentive to the word, to the text itself. Many of these guys are very much concerned about following, quote unquote, the rules. And the more we as ordained or ordained by baptism are encouraging our bishops to take their own responsibility. I mean, their role within the church was highlighted by the Vatican II. The place of the local church, the role of subsidiarity, collegiality within the community is written, and to encourage them to live according to the spirit of what their ordination is.
Yeah, one of the ironies of Vatican II from the perspective of bishops is, the bishops of Vatican II clearly understood that their collective responsibility, their collegiality, to use the term, was something that they had to stress, that they believed was the way forward in the church. And somehow or other, that notion of collegiality was kidnapped. Even within the time of the council itself, kidnapped and distorted, so that what the bishops wanted to be at Vatican II was not something that they ever were allowed, have yet been allowed to become. And it's a shame, because You know, we're choosing bishops these days, I think, for reasons that are not, I do not believe, I'm not going to say that every bishop isn't a holy man, but I think that when we look at the criteria for the selection of bishops, being Christ-like is not the top of the list of those requirements. And nor is it a priority that they gather together as a college and actually understand that they possess collective authority. Unfortunately, because that was kidnapped, bishops today are more hogtied relative to Rome than they were at the time of the council. Certainly more hogtied. There's almost nothing they can do in terms of leadership that isn't programmed for them by Rome. I don't know if that's a response to what you were saying or not. But you know, again, it's what a wonderful thing it will be for our bishops to be reminded of the Vatican teaching on their collegiality, and you know, to see what they're missing.
Something that you said just reminded me of this. In the 60s, I was teaching women, and because I had my degree from a public college before I entered the sisters, I was able to teach at that level, and I had never been to parochial school or anything like that, so my mother was the theologian in my life. My mother taught us about Jesus and how Jesus was love, God was love, and Jesus walked with the poor and the marginalized. And so that became terribly important to me, and therefore it kind of became important to my students too, who had questions. And so my students and I walked with battered women and gay men, and wherever we saw people on the margins. And that to me was everything. And so I felt I had to put my body where my words were. And so I did these things kind of under the radar, although I would, someone knew where I was. However, so I guess when the 60s, when the council came along, I was so excited. I couldn't believe that things were turning around this way. And it just became so terribly important to me. And then as I began to see the fading away of so much, I felt that putting your body where your words are had always been a motto to me. And I came here to the Spirit of Life community because that's what Jean did. Jean put her body where her words were. Because if people can't visualize something, they can talk about it all day long, but it doesn't happen. Someone's got to have the courage of her convictions. That's how I spent my life, whether it got me in trouble or not. And I am still here, and Jean is a real inspiration to me because that's what she's living out. And I just wanted to be able to get that put in here because that's one of the greatest joys that I have of Jean. And Ron taught at college, and Ron taught the theology, and so I just love them so dearly. So it's just kind of a plug for our wonderful, empowering group of people who sit in a circle and treat one another with total love and respect.
we are coming to the close of this segment. As much as I don't want to bring our conversation to a close. So how about this question to bring our evening to a close? It comes from Christy from Dallas, Fort Worth, Texas. Her question is, what was the gift of Blessed John the 23rd? What does he have to say to this generation?
Well, I would just say one word: fearlessness.
A phrase, or two things I'd like to say. One, it should be an example that hang in there, because even a pope can surprise you. Okay. And the other is a quick segue back to the previous comment that I think we should carry away with us. Don't give so much power, attention, and ad nauseum concentration on the structures and the frameworks and that which you cannot do, which is making us ignore and forget all that we can do. The gift of Vatican II was the empowering of the laos, the laity, the people of God, who we are, church, okay? And so go out and do. There's so much you can do that no authority could or should even stop you. There's very few things that will mandate us to cease and desist. So go out and live faith, be like Jesus, be with the poor, love one another, make peace, and laugh a little. Thank you.
On behalf of everyone at Call to Action, MT and Paul, it was such a thrill to have you both here tonight. And we hope that all of you here present with us, but also those who have joined us across the country have enjoyed it as much as we have here in person. Again, I would be crazy not to have the podium to say to anybody who enjoyed this kind of program, we really do want to do more of this, not only just around the country, but also using the live streaming over the internet to connect more people. So if you have it in your means to be able to be generous, both here, then also the donate button on the website, it would be most grateful, and I really appreciate it. We will, this kickoff event of Vatican II Church Forward, we bring to a conclusion, but it is just the beginning as we celebrate the wonderful wisdom and hope of Vatican II. We bring this to a conclusion for those of you who are joining us around the country. We have the fortunate time to have a reception, to be able to mingle personally and continue the conversation. So on behalf of everyone at Call to Action, good night.